Ash and his friends approach the downed figure of Ryuki, who at this point seemingly hasn't seen them yet, his eyes set firmly on his Drudigan as he continues a sentence that the heroes weren't privy to the beginning of, telling the dragon type that they are real monsters. Here Ash pipes up, asking what are real monsters, and when Ryuki spots him at last, he sneers at something not for baby's ears, since he doesn't want to give him nightmares. Ash balks at this, saying he's come a long way from Vast Pony Canyon, and he's ready to prove it here and now in a battle, but Lily puts a hand on his chest, telling him to stand down, since he won't accomplish anything by picking fights. Ryuki jeers at this, but Lily doesn't deign to give him a rise, instead asking if he's the trainer who beat her brother. Smirking, the redhead taunts that he wiped the floor with a platinum blonde chump who looked just as wimpy as her a few days ago, if that's what she means. This makes Lily grit her teeth, but forcing herself to keep her cool, she chooses to channel Cynthia and Burnett, calmly telling Ryuki that in that case, they need his power, since they're going to be clearing Team Skull out of Po Town. Ryuki sneers that they can forget it, since he came to this island for real challenges, not playtime with babies and posers. This makes Lily smile, and she tells him that she thought he might say that, so she's got a deal for him. If he can beat her, he doesn't have to help, but otherwise he's joining their strike team tonight. Ryuki says whatever, he'll beat her just like her brother if that's what it takes to shut her up, before growling that he's seen that condescending smile on another face too many times, so it'll be fun to knock it off hers. He then barks at his worn-out Drudigan to get in the ring, and take out Miss Prissy Princess, so they can get out of here. In response, a fierceness fills Lily's eyes as she brings out Snowy, one that to her friends is known as the return of Z-powered Lily, but to Ryuki is a cause for fear, sending a shiver down his spine at how much this brat looks like her. Nonetheless, he orders Drudigan to rush in and use Ironhead, as he is sure it can outspeed the princess's Vulpix. But having learned from watching Ash and Rufflet all this time, Lily and Snowy are well aware that small stature and speed can be just as dangerous as big bulky power. Snowy demonstrates this by gracefully leaping between Drudigan's legs and sidestepping its heavy tail before twisting and punishing the attempt at a super effective attack with an aura beam right between Drudigan's wings. Trainer and Pokemon both growl as the Cave Dragon Pokemon attempts to lash out with its tail once more, this time successfully smacking Snowy back. This makes the Arctic Fox yip in pain, but Lily encourages her Pokemon to stay strong, as that wasn't a real attack, more so an immature lashing out, before telling him to fire off a barrage of Moonblasts. Drudigan and Ryuki's eyes widen as the Fairy-type energy gathers atop Vulpix's open maw, with the aspiring Dragon Master once again ordering Drudigan to charge him with Ironhead, in the hope that this will reduce the move's power. Thinking fast, Lily quickly cancels her prior order and calls for a disable, as Snowy's eyes glow, and Drudigan suddenly finds itself unable to correctly remember how to use Ironhead, instead sloppily charging forward with its head down. This leaves it wide open to be hit with a Moonblast, which finally seems to drop Drudigan, as it falls to one knee and glares at Lily and Snowy. Lily then calls for a final Moonblast to secure her win, but Ryuki shows he is far more experienced, as he suddenly reveals that Drudigan is not as helpless as it seems from long range, having it let loose a belch of hellfire on his call for Flamethrower. Racing forward faster than either Lily or Snowy can react, the fire engulfs the little Vulpine, much to Lily's horror. However, before this can fully immolate the ice type, a bright pink light splits the flame in half as a final Moonblast is released and hits Drudigan straight on. For a moment, neither trainer does anything, both recognizing their partners will not be able to go on any further, and so wordlessly put their faith in them and hope the other Pokemon's constitution will give out faster.
Then as one, both Pokemon fall, causing Ryuki to scowl. Recalling his Pokemon, he barges past Lily, telling her that he's out of here. But Lily coyly asks him where he's going, since they've still got to tell him the details for tonight. Ryuki crassly asks if she was dropped on her head as a baby, since she didn't beat him, so he doesn't have to do squat. But Lily just grins widely, a haughty look on her face that once more makes her resemble the same person she did back in the desert, though for the life of him, Ash can't figure out who that is. She then reminds Ryuki that her exact words were that he didn't have to help if he could beat her. Since their battle ended in a draw, he's the only one who really loses, not her. Ryuki curses her for this, saying Lily is just like her, before seething that he'll join their stupid siege, since he won't allow anyone to call him a liar. He then fiercely stomps away, while Ash bemoans the fact that once again, he missed out on his chance to battle Ryuki. With their business concluded, Ash and friends leave the lake, determined to head back to the Pokemon Center and get last-minute rest before the assault. However, with it being lunchtime, and Ash's stomach growling, they do make a brief stop at Ula Ula Meadow to enjoy a picnic. During this time, Lily heads to the edge of the field facing the sea, and brings out Finn, so that he can enjoy his lunch as well, and go for a swim. But to her surprise, she finds a familiar face already waiting for her in the water. Though rusted and emaciated, it is not hard for Lily to recognize Ash's blue poniard when it crawls up onto land and flops down, causing her to bend down to pick it up. In a concerned voice, she asks if Poniard really swam all the way from Akala Island just to follow Ash. And despite its exhaustion, Poniard nods and flexes, trying to show how much stronger it has become since the grand trial. Thoroughly impressed, yet concerned such a gesture means Poniard doesn't understand why it no longer travels with their group, she gives a cautious look around, curious to see if Ash or anyone has followed her, since a reunion at this point could be problematic. Thankfully, it seems she is well and truly alone, aside from her own Pokemon, and so, pulling a few berries from her bag, she offers them to Poniard, who happily begins digging in savagely by stabbing the fruit to bring it to his mouth with gluttonous speed. She then smiles at Finn, and tells him he can swim for a little while longer while she helps Poniard. As Poniard eats, she once again goes through her bag and produces an oil she uses as a hair care product as well as a handkerchief, and asks if Poniard wants her to try and get the rust off it, which the dark type this time more graciously accepts. As the oil and friction are used to polish Poniard's metallic armor and strip away the oxidized metal, Lily finally asks if Poniard is aware of what it did wrong. Nodding, Poniard makes a weak slash at the air before scowling contemptuously, and doing so again, this time making a rather unnerving whoosh as the blade slices through the air and causes a small breeze to knock Lily's hat off her head and into the ocean. This elicits a gasp from the blonde, who reaches for her hat, only for Finn to expertly tear through the water in order to snatch it up and bring it back, albeit now a bit wet and with teeth marks on the brim. Nonetheless, Lily leans down and pets her friend, thanking him for being so thoughtful, before getting another idea and releasing Bernie to ask if he'd mind helping her dry her hat by sitting next to it. Though after a moment's thought, she makes sure to stress the little lizard to do so carefully. Poniard then grunts, causing the girl to return to her cleaning, as the bright cobalt blue and shiny silver are finally beginning to glisten with the handkerchief and oil successfully clearing away the rust. Briefly, Lily wonders to herself if she should keep using this particular hair care product before returning to her previous conversation with Poniard, telling it that it is wrong. No one, especially not Ash, thought it was too weak. No, Ash's anger with it came from how it approached battling and its teammates. It didn't seem to care who it hurt so long as it won, and for someone who loves Pokemon as much as Ash, that kind of ruthlessness would always be a weakness rather than a strength. This makes Poniard scowl to the extent that a creature with no discernible mouth can scowl, but it is not accompanied by an expression of anger, rather one of deep contemplation, and something that Lily suspects might be fear. Wanting to comfort the Pokemon in this period of turmoil, she lays a hand atop the cool metallic dome of its head and pats it, saying that once upon a time, she never could have imagined her and Meanie being on the same page about anything, but by working together, they'd come to understand each other more. Perhaps if the two of them go to Ash now and Poniard shows that understood his mistake, he might give it a second chance. However, Lily swiftly sees that Poniard didn't hear a word she said after its mistake, as its eyes flash with defiant fury. Shrugging away from the girl, Poniard stomps over to the shoreline and leaps back into the water, resuming its vigorous swing from before and putting all Lily's hard work cleaning it to waste. It is therefore a rather dejected Lily who returns to her friends when her hat has dried and Finn has had his swim. Ash and Kiawe are just finishing up their customary post-lunch training battle, though when Kiawe spots her dismay, he calls a timeout, asking what's wrong. Lily explains her encounter with Poniard, and Ash scowls not too dissimilar to how Poniard did, growling that he thought he told to leave them alone back on Akala Island. Lily can clearly see that Ash is still rightfully angry with it for almost killing his starter, but asks if there's any chance he would go talk to it, since it seems to have lost its way even more since leaving Ash's team. Briefly, a conflicted look fills the boy's eyes, and Lily hopes that maybe this estrangement can come to a happy end. But then, Ash sets his jaw, and in a stubborn voice still full of hurt, says that he won't.
It is therefore a somewhat tense trip back to Marley City, and because of the distance and lateness of the hour, our trio don't get much of a chance to talk before they are joined by Gladion, Hau, and Ryuki in preparation for their assault on Po Town. Naturally, Ryuki is abrasive from the start, saying he thought he would be working with competent trainers, not baby, prissy, muscly, broody, and idiot. Tentatively, Hau asks if he is idiot, to which Ryuki snarks that if he has to ask, then that's his answer. Gladion then steps in to defend Hau, saying that just because he's strong doesn't mean he gets to demean people, which only makes Ryuki jeer further as he asks if Broody Boy wants to get his butt kicked for a second time. Ash, as informal leader, then has to step in and break up what could be a messy fight, reminding the pair they're on the same side, and they need to put their grudges on hold until they've liberated Po Town from Team Skull. Frowning a little, Gladion regains his composure, saying that he can do that, for all the people have lost their homes. But Ryuki jeers that only a wimp runs from a fight and calls it valor. However, he doesn't push anyone else's buttons after that, allowing Ash, Lily, and Kiawe to lay out the plan they've been making over the last few days. The trio explain that since they don't know where Guzma's HQ is, their best bet would be a frontal assault, and when Team Skull grunts emerge to challenge them, they'll make it their mission to push forward in that direction. Hau seems concerned by such a brash strategy, asking if it wouldn't be wiser to get some aerial surveillance with their flying types, but Ryuki says that the great Ryuki only does things one way, and that's loud, so if they want to do some wimpy stealth attack, they can do it without him. Lily then speaks up, agreeing with Ryuki of all people, saying they don't have time to waste, and that Ash's plan will give them the best odds, since if there are any traps, they can spring them early while they're fresh and all together, rather than after a protracted war of attrition. Accepting this, Hau nods that he's with them all the way, earning himself a pat on the back from everyone but Ryuki.
Under the dwindling sun, the team of 6 cut across Mount Hakalani, thanks to another secret tunnel courtesy of Sophocles, and are able to arrive outside of Po Town by early evening. Wanting to announce their presence and draw out the grunts, Kiawe and Ryuki work in tandem to demolish the front gate, using a combination of Turtonator's shell trap and boom burst from Ryuki's hitherto unseen Noivern. As expected, this punches right through and makes enough noise that a dozen grunts begin charging out of the large mansion at the end of the street. Ash tries to coordinate a plan for dealing with these grunts, but Ryuki doesn't care and simply charges forward, saying he'll take care of them all. Gladion fiercely tells him to stop, but when the red-haired young man refuses, he runs off after him. Lily and Hal then give chase after Gladion, and with a resigned sigh, Ash and Kiawe join the fray. By splitting into pairs, the 3 smaller groups are each challenged by 4 grunts, and though the odds are 2 to 1, all of our heroes have been hard at work, and so push past these fodder trainers with little injury to any of their Pokemon. Converging outside the big mansion, the others are stunned to hear Ryuki giving Gladion a compliment, saying that maybe he's not so much of a pushover after all, but that just means Ryuki will have to swat Gladion like a bug type at the league. Gladion blithely says that he'll look forward to their rematch, and the pair give each other a respectful nod. Hal hopefully asks if he can be Ryuki's rival too, but it is immediately shot down, with the dragon trainer saying he doesn't waste his time on chumps or trash, and Hal looks like he's both. The grandson of Hala hangs his head at this diss, but Lily is there to pat him on the back, and kindly say that she'll be his rival if he wants. Meanwhile, Ash and Kiawe take point at the front of the group, telling them that this time they're all going to stay together, since they have strength in numbers. The others all nod as Ryuki huffs, and Ash kicks in the door, only to find 50 grunts in waiting, all with their Pokemon out and ready for a fight. Ash prepares to tell his crew to stand and fight, but Ryuki puts a hand on his chest, telling him and the others to go ahead, and he'll deal with these fools. The son of Cynthia protests that there's way too many for even him, but Ryuki says that Ash doesn't even know half of his real strength, and barks at him to leave so he can get down to breaking his new toys. Ash still seems unsure, but a firm nod from Gladion convinces our hero, so he and the others skirt around outside the entry hall, while Ryuki squares off with the 50 grunts and starts laughing maniacally.
However, the remaining 5 friends don't even make it up a single flight of stairs before they are greeted by a new impediment, a duo of Team Skull members who identify themselves as Alpha Grunts, the biggest and baddest in all of Team Skull. This time it is Gladion who steps forth and says that if Ryuki can take on 50 trainers, then he can handle 2. Though Lily protests this, saying that if he's staying then so is she. Gladion barks that it isn't safe for her, but Lily gives her older brother a stern look, telling him that he won't change her mind, before adding that he needs her, flashing a Z-ring which she still has around her wrist. One of the Alpha Grunts gives this display a wheezy giggle, saying that with their woeful teamwork, these bleach blonde bozos will be no match for the unparalleled partnership of the Alpha Grunts. But that's fine, since they'll just beat them and give all their Pokemon to Guzma, as a way to earn themselves promotion to the rank of admin. The other Alpha Grunt then questions why they aren't admins already, wondering if maybe Alpha Grunt isn't even a real title. This lapse in focus is enough to allow Ash, Kiawe, and Hao as the final 3 to barge past the grunts and up onto the 2nd floor, though as they go, they each wish the Aether siblings luck. Almost unsurprisingly at this point, there is another obstacle waiting for them up here. This time it's Plumeria. With a crack of her Salazzle's Flame Whip, she tells the boys that she is going to battle Kiawe, and maybe the loser with the ponytail, while Ash will go on, since the boss has a special something planned for him in his office. Ash demands to know why they should do anything Guzma wants, but Plumeria shrugs that he can stay if he wants, but she thought this whole ill-conceived raid was to take a crack at Guzma, and here she is offering Ash that shot, so if he doesn't take it, then he's sort of spitting in the face of his friends and their Pokemon, who are taking licks to get him here. Hao and Kiawe say that though they hate to admit it, she's right, and urge him to go on ahead, with Kiawe promising they'll be right behind him once they take care of Plumeria.
Nodding to his friends, Ash steps around Plumeria, and at her direction opens a big pair of double doors leading to a vast office. At the other end is Guzma, and when he sees Ash, he sneers that he's been looking forward to getting his revenge on this little brat, and that even if Ash fluked his way through their encounters on Akala and Melee, that won't happen this time. Ash orders the Team Skull boss to bring it on, since he's not afraid of a man who relies on cowardly tactics. This incenses Guzma, who rises to his feet, frothing at the mouth like a rabid beast, admitting that before, he just wanted to give Ash a beatdown, but now, he's gonna show this mouthy twerp what he's called destruction in human form. And with nothing more to say, Guzma lobs a Pokeball, while a feral snarl rips his way out of his mouth. Back with Lily and Gladion, the pair are already bickering, with Lily's goal of having a real conversation with her elder sibling seemingly clouding her judgment as she begins bringing things up that likely should have been saved for a more private time and place. This causes Gladion to withdraw more and more until he finally reaches the breaking point, screaming at his sister, "Just leave him be!" Lily looks deeply hurt by this outburst, but before she can express it, she and Gladion are reprimanded by the Alpha Grunts of all people, who express that friends shouldn't treat each other like that, much less siblings. They then cite their big sis Plumeria and big bro Guzma as perfect examples the two should follow, before claiming they will teach them the meaning of unity as they call for a Passimian and a Rangaroo.
A floor above them, Kiawe warns how to be careful as Plumeria is a very tricky and dangerous fighter, something that strangely causes her to preen under the backhanded praise and re-extend her offer for him to become one of her beloved knuckle-headed grunts. Just like the first time, Kiawe flatly refuses, though he promises that if she comes quietly, he'll put in a good word for her with Nanu. In the mansion's gloomy lighting, Hao could swear he sees Kiawe blushing a little, though he is tactful enough not to question it, instead focusing on the battle as Plumeria releases her Salazzle and a large Crobat, giving Kiawe one last chance to run. Her answer comes in the form of Hao calling forth his Raichu to take advantage of Crobat's psychic weakness, while Kiawe chooses Charizard, wanting to give it a chance to settle the score with the smug salamander. Back in the office, as Ash gazes upon Guzma's mean-looking Tropius and reaches for his first Pokemon, the Skull Boss smirks and reveals that he's had a few of his boys keeping an eye on him. He knows that Ash has 4 Pokemon, while he has 5, meaning that if Ash wants to take him down, he'll obviously need to defeat all of them, since he's not restricting himself to some goody two-shoes 4-on-4. This makes Ash grit his teeth, though he doesn't say a word, remaining quiet and calm before finishing his motion and releasing his first choice, that being Rufflet. Wasting no time, Rufflet opens with Tailwind, then when the gust is properly blowing, capitalizes on it to hurl a pair of empowered air slashes at Tropius. A bit panicked as he hadn't expected Ash to grow so strong in only a few months' time, Guzma calls for his main flyer to stay strong and go for a Dragon Dance to reduce the speed difference. As Draconic Energy surges from the grass and flying type, it flaps its wings both as a form of dance and in preparation to take off for a high-speed attack. Ash, being familiar with such a tactic, contrasts Guzma by remaining completely serene and telling Rufflet to keep firing off air slashes. Thanks to the Tailwind, the grass flyer quickly finds itself assailed by super effective hits, and as air slashes are known to do, it makes the target flinch, halting the dance and the takeoff sequence. Furiously, Guzma spits that the fruit Pokemon is useless, but before he can have Tropius restart the process, a particularly well-placed air slash catches it between the eyes, scoring a critical hit and knocking it unconscious. Already it is clear that things are not going as Guzma had planned, and as he recalls Tropius in favour of his Glalie, Ash gives him a stern look, declaring this is going to be a hard and long lesson for the Team Skull Boss, taught to him by Ash Sharona, son of the world's strongest champion.
Downstairs, Lily and Gladion are still unable to properly work together, even as their teachers begin to grow irritated with them, still arguing with one another rather than the opponents. Finally, one of the Alpha Grunts declares they ought to just kick the siblings out of the building and save their energy, a claim their companion agrees with, and it is only the realization of what such a failure could mean for their friends on the upper level if they ended up pincered between opponents that makes Lily and Gladion form a silent pact to put everything other than the battle out of their minds for the time being. Heads now truly in the game, Lily calls for Snowy, telling him to let loose a Moonblast just like Miss Cynthia taught them on past Simeon, while Gladion asks Savali, who appears to have evolved from his type Null, to take out Oranguru with a crunch. Unfortunately, things cannot be that easy, as while the Alpha Grunts are happy their opponents are working together at last, they aren't going to hand them the victory, having their Pokemon suddenly swap sides, as Passimian uses Counter while Oranguru begins using Nasty Plot. At once, Savali's power is turned against it, as Passimian slams into the Chimera and throws it back towards Snowy's Moonblast for devastating damage. All the while, Oranguru stays where it is, clearly setting itself up for a follow-up blow. In tandem, Lily and Gladion have the same thought, speaking in unison and stating that they have to delegate tasks and trust each other to carry them out on their own, before blushing at seeing themselves on the same page for once. Gladion then fishes through his pocket and pulls out a case containing mini discs before selecting one and calling for Savali to hold tough as they're going to take the attacker role. Grunting its understanding, Savali gets back to his feet, looking back at his trainer and nodding as Gladion throws a strange black disc to it, which weirdly seems to absorb into Savali's body and change his glowing feathers into a deep black themselves.
Lily meanwhile calls out to Snowy that they'll handle the defense, causing the Alpha Grunts to congratulate their students, though they're afraid it's too little too late. With the Oranguru all powered up, this Psychic should be enough to put both Pokemon down. However, before the attack can land, Gladion tells Savali to get in front of Snowy, an order which makes Lily cry out that she thought he was trusting her to handle the defense. Sweeping his fringe in an undeniably cool way, Gladion solemnly states that he does trust her, but this is the most logical move. Just watch. A moment later, the Psychic Wave strikes Savali, though it seems to have no effect on the artificial Pokemon, and due to their placement, Snowy is also protected, prompting the elder brother to explain that thanks to the Arceus system, his partner is now a Dark type, rendering the move null and void. As Lily quietly asks if her brother really just made a pun, the Alpha Grunt commanding Passimian tells her to rush in and take these two jokers out. But as it does, Lily orders Snowy to get in front of Savali and use Aurora Beam to make the floor in front of Passimian slick. However, wanting to repay its battle partner for the protection, Snowy goes above and beyond, releasing not a freezing string of rainbow rings, but a bright bluish beam of Sub-Zero energy that causes the floor to instantly go slick and make Passimian lose its balance. Though before it can truly go out of control, Oranguru steadies it with Psychic Attack, that being the only thing it can really do now that Sorvali is a Dark type. However, this moment of distraction is all Suvali needs as it surges forward with aerial ace, striking past Simeon and sending it skidding across the battlefield before crashing into its real target, a Rangaroo. Unfortunately for the Alpha Grunts, this is not the full extent of the plan, as Gladion fulfills his role of attacker admirably, having Suvali slide after past Simeon and clamp its fangs into a Rangaroo's forearm, with the now same type attack bonus Crunch. This coupled with the collision damage is enough to take out the Simeon Sage, and start an argument between the Alpha Grunts over whose fault is they are down to just one Pokemon. Adopting a menacing tone reminiscent of her brother, Lily replies that actually she thinks that number would be 0, as with another Moonblast, Snowy dispatches past Simeon, leaving them the victors, though she does at least thank the Alpha Grunts for their advice. It was most illuminating. The Alpha Grunts, unable to comprehend that they'd been defeated in a double battle, then move to release more Pokemon, but Gladion is faster on the draw as he releases Hawlucha, who rushes the two and renders them the same condition as their partners with swift chops to the neck. Nodding approvingly, Lily thanks her brother before asking if they should head upstairs and help the others. However, Gladion sighs that he has faith in them to complete their mission. Right now, they need to talk.
Returning to Ash and Guzma, the boy's originally serene demeanor has been replaced with a loud call of pride and Marowak, as Glalie drops to the ground unable to battle. So far, he is 2 for 0, meaning Guzma's planned numbers advantage has evaporated, though the boy is sensible enough to see that his Pokemon have fatigue from their battles, a factor which could spell trouble if he leaves them in for too long. For that reason, when Guzma brings out a Salandit, he tells Marowak to take a break, calling forth Popplio. Coming off her recent loss to Gary, Popplio wants to redeem herself in the eyes of her trainer, and so is ready to go when Ash tells her to use Aqua Jet. Breathing herself in water, the little seal flies at Salandit, striking it head on and making it hiss with pain. However, this is all part of Guzma's plan, as he has Salandit bite down on Popplio's nose as soon as she makes contact. Awful poison drips from the salamander's maw as it bites the water starter, and when a purple rash begins to form on her snout, Ash can tell Popplio has been badly poisoned. Over with Hal and Kiawe, the two of them are having similar troubles with Plumeria, as it seems Team Skull's second in command is determined to land Toxic on both their Pokemon. Dodging has become all they can hope to achieve, though thankfully, Raichu is nimble and maneuverable enough to do so, while Charizard is able to keep up through sheer determination not to fall prey to the Serpentine's seductions for a second time. However, Plumeria is cunning, quickly adapting and using Screech to force Raichu and Charizard to stop and clutch their ears in pain. This leaves them vulnerable to a double Toxic, though just as the same rashes as Popplio's form on their Pokemon's faces, Kiawe calls out to Hal that now is the time, as Charizard uses their opponent's seeming moment of triumph to wreathe Crobat and Salazzle in a vortex of fire. Plumeria scoffs that this is useless, as Crobat could simply fly out with Salazzle, or Salazzle could just dive through the flame. However, at the sight of Kiawe and Hal smirking, and the sudden realization that Raichu is nowhere to be seen, Plumeria looks up to see the surfing rodent suddenly dive into the eye of the vortex from above, and releasing a massive field of static that envelops both their Pokemon, causing them to writhe and flinch as they become very badly paralyzed. Flustered, Plumeria tries to shake the boy's faith by stating that she may be slowed down, but she's not on the same incredibly fast ticking clock that they are. But to her horror, Hal and Kiawe throw something to their Pokemon, which she quickly recognizes as plump pink heart-shaped berries. Petches. Growling as the poisoning she worked so hard for is instantly cured, Plumeria curses herself for not thinking ahead, since it's obvious these goody two-shoes twerps would have had some sort of strategy for raiding their base. Foul temper on full display, she calls it a dirty trick using items to intervene in a battle, but Kiawe fiercely states that this is a war, before he and Hal agreed to end this with a Dragon Rush and Thunder combo. Frantically, Plumeria tries to call for her partners to dodge, but thanks to their movements being hampered by paralysis, she can only look on helplessly, as Salazzle is driven out of the fire spin and into the wall behind her by the Dragonic Tackle, while Crobat is nearly fried from the massively powerful strike of electricity before it too falls.
Kiawe and Charizard then celebrate their triumph with a fist bump, as Hal, channeling his grandfather, tells Plumeria to think about her actions and reflect on what brought her there. Plumeria's only response is a derisive grunt as she walks to her downed Pokemon and pulls them into a hug, trying to soothe them as they continue to be pestered by paralysis. Suddenly, Kiawe, flanked by Charizard, kneels in front of her, and assuming he's about to try and haul her away, Plumeria spits back that she isn't going to try anything funny and to simply leave her and her precious teammates alone. However, instead of making any grabbing motions, Kiawe simply extends a hand, which contains 2 cherry berries, as he admits that he and Lily searched a good while for them in preparation for tonight, so if she can swallow her pride, he'd rather help her Pokemon than let them go to waste. Quietly, she thanks Kiawe, before shocking him with a smooch on the cheek that causes the young fire specialist to recoil in shock, while blushing furiously. Giggling a little, she then states that she owes him one for the berries, but she won't be sticking around for the cops, before snapping her fingers. At once, her well-trained Crobat uses a haze to obscure the trio, and a moment later a window is heard shattering. Hastily, Charizard's wings do away with the smoke, but Plumeria is already long gone, and as Kiawe shakes his head, Hal pats him on the shoulder in solidarity, muttering something about the one that got away. That is until Kiawe dryly reminds him that they just allowed a criminal to escape, at which point the grandson of Hala adopts a more sheepish expression, promising not to tell the others how it happened if Kiawe won't.
Despite his small size, Guzman Salander proves to be the biggest threat to Ash's team so far, as after he recalled Popplio to shield her from poison's effects, the toxic lizard managed to poison and then promptly take out Rufflet, handing Ash his first loss. Not wanting poison to spread to his whole team, Ash makes the tough call of asking Popplio to return to the battle and stick this one out. Nodding her understanding, Popplio uses Aqua Jet once more, and like the first time, it does its fair share of damage. The only difference this time is that both Pokemon groan in pain, one from water and the other from poison. It is plain to see that Popplio is on a timer, and so Ash doesn't have time for his usual clever and time-consuming strategies, instead just going with the classic. Hit the opponent really hard with something that works until they stop moving, and that something is Aqua Jet. But unfortunately for Ash, Guzman is not about to let himself be made a fool of for a third time, and so has Salander leap up and use Takedown to knock Popplio out of the watery cloak. He then has it follow up with another Poison Fang, and as Popplio falls to the ground, her body is limp. Solemnly, Ash goes to raise her ball and recall her, thanking her for the good effort. But before he can, Popplio's eyes burst open, a faint otherworldly shine to them. The shine soon extends to her entire body, appearing as some healing aura while the water of the failed Aqua Jet returns to its creator and begins circling around her in a series of interconnected rings. Ash knows this move from his mother's Milotic. This is Aqua Ring. Rising onto her flippered tail, Popplio immediately looks healthier, having gotten their second wind, and not wanting to squander it, Ash called for one last Aqua Jet. At once, the healing water reconverges on Popplio, and as she rockets forward, Guzman Salander is taken out just like his sister. Popplio beams up at Ash, a proud look on her timid face, and smiling wide, Ash congratulates her on the victory. That is, until a terrible shadow falls over her. Looking up, Popplio sees Guzman's next Pokemon towering over her, and it is Golisopod. All it takes is one swift swipe of the water book's sharp claws to down the poison pup. Then before Ash can bring out a Pokemon to counter it, it vanishes back into his ball, leaving the field empty.
Wanting to keep Kommo-o in reserve for whatever nasty surprise Guzman may have up his sleeve, Ash brings back Marowak, telling him to be vigilant, as Guzman's Hypno takes to the field and begins menacingly shining its coin. It seems some part of the Alpha Grunt's claim of having highest standing in Team Skull must have been true, as Guzman opens this bout by mirroring their nasty plot strategy. Ash, however, isn't going to stand by and do nothing, instead ordering Marowak to get in close and use Shadow Bone. Running in, Marowak's bone alights with ethereal green flames, though this time Guzman is the one ahead of the curve, as he calls for Hypno to intercept the attack with Psychic. The Taper struggles a little to do so against a Ghost-type opponent, but in the end it is successful, slowing down Marowak's attack and sending him veering off course, enough to create an opening for Guzman's true plan, that being a powered-up Shadow Ball. Mercilessly, Hypno drives the Orb of Darkness into Marowak's back, causing a loud explosion that sends the Bonekeeper Pokemon flying out from a cloud of smoke, unconscious. Quietly, Ash praises his friend's tenacity before returning him to his ball. As Guzman cackles and gloats that the Runt's big talk seems to have all dried up, he then reminds Ash that he knows his entire team, including the fact that his last Pokemon is at a massive disadvantage against Hypno. And even in the unlikely case that he is able to win, Golisopod can always bring the match to a fast close. Face it, it's over. Now why doesn't he do the smart thing and drop his Pokeballs and surrender? If he tells his little friends to do the same, he and his guys may let them leave with only a few bruises. Ash freezes, cold fear coursing through him, but then he remembers something his mother said during their trip to Kanto, when he asked her about the topic of fear.
Ash and Cynthia had just ordered ice cream from room service, and were digging in, when suddenly, Ash posed a surprising question. Mom, does anything scare you? Being a bit taken aback by the question, the champ comments this came out of nowhere, but Ash explained that during his depressive episode, he had begun to worry that maybe he didn't deserve to be your son. Suddenly, Cynthia's face had darkened, and she snapped at him to never think that again. He's her son and always will be, and if anyone should be scared, it's whoever says he's not. This ferocity had made Ash gulp, but all the same, he repeated his question, and this time, Cynthia chose to answer, saying that of course there are things that scare her. Fear is the most natural emotion in the world. Everyone feels it, from the weakest Rattata to the strongest legendary Pokemon. And because of that, it's nothing to be ashamed of either, since it's a sign of wisdom. Laughing a little, Ash had teased that in that case, she must be scared of a bunch of stuff, but with no trace of humor, Cynthia had confirmed this. A little startled by this, Ash had asked what scares her most then, and in a soft voice, Cynthia had answered in two simple words, losing you.
Back in the present, Ash's blood boils, burning away the fear, and as if sensing his brother's need, Kommo-o suddenly bursts from his Pokeball with a defiant roar. Together the pair cry out in vocal defiance of Guzma, and though the Team Skull boss orders Hypno to put an end to this with Psychic, Kommo-o seems to almost shrug it off, replacing the Psychic aura with the same draconic energy that erupted from Tropius earlier. This is Dragon Dance. At Guzma's furious yell, Hypno frantically tries harder to hold Kommo-o back, but as if possessed, the dragon forces his way through the Psychic hold, a fearsome glint to his eyes as he blazes across the room and buries a dragon claw in Hypno's stomach, sending it crashing into the wall, unconscious.
For a moment, Ash and Guzma both look on in shock, before remembering the battle isn't over, as Guzma tosses out his last Pokemon, that being Golisopod. Like with Popplio, Guzma calls for first impression, hoping to do as he predicted, only for Ash to simultaneously call for Sky Uppercut, which impedes the move from hitting home and locks Guzma out of any more opportunities to use it. Growling in anger, Guzma calls for his Pokemon to instead go for a barrage of Fury Cutters, which Ash and Kommo-o counter with their own barrage of Dragon Claws, stalemating the two Pokemon as they roar their own names in tandem while their trainers cheer for them. Soon, the sheer force these two titans are generating pushes them away from each other. And it is only now that the moment of adrenaline has passed that it becomes obvious how exhausted both Kommo-o and Golisopod are. However, one thing is also clear. Golisopod, as a hit-and-run fighter who is unused to prolonged battles, is definitely in the worst state, meaning one more good hit will take it out. Then, Guzma pulls something out of his pocket which causes Ash's blood to run cold, as he demands to know how Guzma's got a Z-ring since he's an enemy of Alola. Alas, his only answer is Guzma suddenly making a creepy insect-like motion that is mirrored by Golisopod, as Z-power surges between them. Hastily, Ash responds with his own Z-move to counter, applying Olivia's lesson about how it can be used offensively. When the final poses have been struck, Golisopod releases a massive beam of silk thread from his mouth that clashes against the ethereal fist firing from Kommo-o. While Ash and Guzma are forced to cover their faces and kneel down, lest they be blown back by the shockwave of air that blows the windows out of the office and sends trash and debris flying in all directions. This chaos lasts only a few moments, then a dead calm takes its place, as Pokemon and trainers stare one another down, waiting to see who will fall first. As it turns out, the answer is both, as Golisopod begins to crash face first into unconsciousness with Kommo-o mirroring it, only to quickly reawaken and catch itself on his feet, just before he fully loses balance. Guzma is stunned, while Ash smiles as Cynthia would in this situation, and begins to state that as the winner, Guzma and Team Skull have to listen to him now. But a sinister smirk from the older man tells Ash that something is very wrong. Then suddenly, the wooden desk behind him explodes into chunks, and a metallic red blur collides with Kommo-o, freezing Ash in his tracks. With a terrifying realization, he recognizes what the cause of this upset is, as a scarred Bisharp stands tall and extends a glowing blade at Ash, while Kommo-o, pushed at last to his limits, falls unconscious to the ground.
Did I say 4 on 5? I meant 6. We just haven't had the chance to get you a proper Pokeball. Ain't that right, bro? Guzma gloats as the Bisharp menacingly closes in on Ash, seemingly preparing to gut him. Ash growls at the dirty trick as his back hits the door he entered through. Wanting to go out on his own terms, Ash confidently states that even if he goes down here, he knows Lily, Gladion, Hao, Kiawe, and even that jerk Ryuki will finish the job and take Guzma out. There's no version of this story where Guzma walks away victorious. Odd solemnity to his voice, Guzma agrees, but then snarks that he can see a version without Ash though, and that's good enough for him, since he's tired of the kid always getting in his way. Taking this as its cue, Bisharp swings its blade towards the boy, and Ash closes his eyes, ready to accept his fate. Then, a harsh clang fills Ash's ears, and when he opens his eyes, he sees Bisharp being driven into a wall by a similar blur of blue and brown. Looking closer, Ash recognizes his former teammate, albeit covered once more in rust, as it reveals itself to have spied on the battle. The red Bisharp is plainly infuriated to see its rival, while the blue Pawniard looks cocky and confident, tauntingly beckoning for old Red to come and have another go if it thinks it's up for the challenge. At once, Bisharp flies into a rage, disregarding any sense or strategy and simply lunging at Pawniard. But as it's about to learn, this is exactly what the shiny pre-evolution wanted it to do. Suddenly, orange energy coats one of Pawniard's blade hands, and when it drives it into Bisharp's stomach, the red Rampager drops to the ground with a loud clang. That was Brick Break. From behind Ash, the office door bursts open, with all his friends running in, but the son of Cynthia barely notices as his eyes are locked on the blue Pawniard. Meeting his gaze, the shiny gives its ex-trainer a smug salute, before leaping through one of the broken windows and out of sight, leaving Ash more perplexed than ever as to why it appeared in the first place. Did it come here to save him, or was this just it being its usual vengeful self, and picking another fight with the scarred Bisharp? However, Ash has more pressing concerns, those being his current team members, and so bringing them out, he checks that everyone is okay. Though battered and bruised, each of his Pokemon's spirits seem to be high as they spot the defeated form of Guzma, and one by one they pile in to give their trainer a hug. Smiling despite his own fatigue, Ash thanks them all from the bottom of his heart, and as they look up at him, one Pokemon in particular feels more than just pride and affection for their trainer. Suddenly, a white light begins to engulf Popplio, with her looking at first scared and confused, but then excited, as frills blossom along her torso. A moment later it is Brione who lies nestled in his lap, and as Ash gives her an extra congratulatory cuddle, Ash's human friends at last speak up. In voices that sound just as exhausted as Ash and his Pokemon, the rest of the heroes ask their leader what they should do now, and with a smile on his face, Ash tells them to gather up any Team Skull members they can find. They've won the war for Po Town.
It is only when Ash says this that Guzma accepts his situation, the last remnants of fight leaving his eyes as he allows Kiawe and Gladion to usher him into a small bedroom where the Alpha Grunts have already been confined. With the senior members of Team Skull, Sans Plumeria, now captured, the heroes begin descending the mansion's grand staircase to see if they can apprehend any of the weaker members. Upon reaching the ground floor, they are all fairly shocked to see the great Ryuki, sitting atop a pile of battered bodies comprised of the 50-man grunt army and their defeated Pokemon, whilst Druddigan and a smaller black Pokemon with 2 heads wait impatiently alongside their trainer. Sneering at the sight of his quote-unquote allies, Ryuki demands to know what took them so bloody long, while Lily gawks at the carnage, muttering that it's a good thing the up-and-coming Dragon Master and his Drakes are okay. This surprisingly embarrasses Ryuki, who orders the prissy princess to stop fretting over him, since he's not a weakling like the others, a claim which makes everyone else laugh, as they tease that they finally found Ryuki's weakness, and his kindness of all things. The only one to not take part in this ribbing is Ash, who stands off to the side, his mood still somewhat sour as he replays the end of his match with Guzma. Spotting this, Gladion joins him, asking if everything is okay, as he usually doesn't see Ash so solemn, to which the young man admits he's unsure how to feel about the way he achieved victory against Guzma, confiding in his friend the situation in the Blue Poniard. However, Gladion quickly reasons that with Guzma cheating, Ash has no reason to feel guilt, but he correctly deduced that Ash was holding himself to the standard of his mother again, which causes Ash to scratch his head nervously and sigh that may be true. Suddenly remembering his duty to his Pokemon, Ash calls the team to attention to discuss their next move. First and foremost, someone will need to guard the mansion to make sure Guzma and his goons don't end up escaping justice as well. Ryuki surprisingly volunteers, stating that he wasn't at all satisfied with his scrap, and so welcomes the chance for one of these losers to try and get past him. Ash nods his appreciation, and tells the others they can now head back to Melee City and heal their Pokemon, and once that's done, they can inform Nanu of their success. However, at that moment, a perky voice right behind Ash chuckles that there's no need to go to the trouble when they can do that. Jumping in fright, Ash turns around to see Acerola and Mimikins, while the others share a laugh at their leader's expense. Ash demands to know what she's doing and how she got there, with Acerola shrugging that she got bored waiting for them to come back, so she came to check on them. That's how she got there. Well, anything is possible when you can pass to the spirit world. She then offers him a hand, and asks if he'd like to see for himself, in a tone that suggests while she will lead him into the spirit world, she won't necessarily bring him back. Gulping, Ash shakes his head, and Acerola says that's fine, promising that she will inform Uncle Nanu of their progress, before asking how many of the team will be wanting to have grand trial matches. Ash, Gladion, and Hal all raise their hands, though to Ash's surprise, Ryuki does not, with the wannabe Dragon Master scarfing that he's got much more important business to attend to. Nonetheless, Acerola seems happy with the turnout, mischievously giggling that her uncle will hate having to do 3 grand trial battles in a row, since he's spent years actively trying to shirk his duties as much as possible. Kiawe chides that if he put as much effort into doing his job as he did avoiding it, he'd be a great kahuna. But Acerola replies that he is a great kahuna. In fact, he's the strongest of the bunch. She then walks out of the front door, without any form of farewell, having made the arbitrary decision that the conversation is over. Gladion mutters that she's a weird little girl, but Lily chuckles that her brother doesn't know the half of it. Ash then reminds them they should also get going if they want to get to the Pokemon Center by morning. With no objections, the group head off, bidding Ryuki goodbye as they go. When they're gone, Ryuki's demeanor shifts. No longer is he haughty or malicious. Instead, he adopts a businesslike manner as he reaches for a communicator. When the device crackles to life, Ryuki states, "It is done," requesting new orders.
The next morning, after a rest for the trainers and their Pokemon, Ash, Lily, Kiawe, Gladion, and Hal make their way to Nanu's police station to check in and arrange their battles. Looking bedraggled, Nanu seems none too happy to see them, and it is with exceedingly poor grace that he agrees to book in the 3 island challenges. He does, however, set the condition that each match must be at least a week apart, so he can have time to prepare, a claim which makes Acerola snort in derision, and that none of the challengers or their friends can watch any of the other battles, since he doesn't want them learning his tricks in advance. The group accept these terms, and Nanu agrees to pencil Gladion's match in for the end of the week. He then puts Hal's exactly a week later, but says he wants a 2-week gap between Hal and Ash's battles, since if what he's heard about Hal's strength is true, he'll need a week to recover as well. Hal furiously blushes, asking who said he had any sort of strength, and Nanu says Hollis speaks very highly of the boy, though he's also told him that Hal's greatest weakness is his own lack of self-confidence. Hal nervously laughs that's just Gramps hyping him up, and he's really nothing special, but Kiawe chimes in that he couldn't have held his own against Plumeria without Hal's help. Gladion then adds that Hal also braved the desert on his own to save him when he got lost. While Lily smiles they can't forget how he saved Peniola Ranch from Viren and Team Skull. Finally, Ash finishes off by reminding them how Hal was Hulla's first choice for an assistant when fighting off Guzma on Melee Island. All this praise makes Hao blush even redder, but Nanu grunts that there's the proof. So like he said, he's taking a week off after their battle before he starts prepping for his match with Ash. With that settled, the group begin to go their separate ways, but Nanu stops them, hurling 5 yellowish-green objects at them. The friends each catch one and see they are Barginium Z crystals. In response to the kids' questioning looks, Nanu explains that he seized them from Guzma's office during the arrest, and that the weirdo they left his guard was stuffing his pockets with Z crystals when he arrived. He then adds that these 5 were the only ones left when the redhead was done, and since it's too much of a pain in the butt to track down where they came from, it's easier to just pass them off to Ash and co. Ash, Gladion, and Hao all thank the kahuna, but Lily and Kiawe protest that without Z-rings, there's no point in them having these, and they should really be returned to their rightful owners. This causes Nanu to let a gruff bark-like laugh, and he speaks first to Kiawe, telling him that maybe this crystal will finally inspire the boy to stop dawdling and challenge Olivia, since she's been waiting for a chance to battle her mentor's grandson and rival's son for ages. Kiawe asks how the older man knows this, and Nanu simply taps his temple, reminding him that he is good friends with his fellow kahunas. As for Lily, Nanu smirks that if she doesn't have a Z-ring, then what's that fancy thing on her wrist? Lily protests that it's her brother's, but Gladion puts a hand on her shoulder and encourages her to keep it, since he'll earn a new one by beating Nanu. Nanu chuckles this kid is cocky if he really believes he can beat him without a Z move, but Gladion meets the kahuna's eye and blithely smiles that he likes a challenge. Nanu tells him that he'll have a chance to put his money where his mouth is in a week, but until then, the boy better get to training. In fact, they all should, since even though he's lazy, he doesn't pull punches when it comes to battling. Acerola begins to make another snide comment, but her uncle is prepared this time, as he suddenly produces a stale malasada from his pocket and deftly crams it into her mouth, while chuckling that silence truly is bliss.
The gang part ways for real this time, with Hao and Gladion setting their sights for Mount Lanakila, since Gladion wants to give his Gabite some practice fighting ice types, and Hao joking that since Lily is his rival now, he should also train to overcome her starters type. The main trio wish them luck, and decide to head north since their friends are headed south. Returning to the Hokulani Observatory, Ash, Lily, and Kiawe are reunited with Mullane and Sophocles. However, this time it is Lily who challenges Mullane to a battle, saying that just like her brother, she wants to get some practice battling at a type disadvantage, and Snowy is weak to steel types. Mullane graciously accepts, and so the boys cheer Lily on as she faces off against Mullane, and even manages to pull off a win against the former kahuna candidate, thanks to once again pulling on the knowledge that being Kukui's temporary assistant has given her. Fired up by this, Sophocles asks one of his friends to battle as well, and Ash agrees, on much more friendly terms than their first bout. Like Lily, he chooses to battle at a type disadvantage, with Brion against Sophocles' electric types. Though originally meant to only be a one-on-one, both boys' competitive streaks get the better of them, and it quickly turns into a full 3v3, with Ash coming out on top, and Sophocles showing his growth by only sniffling a little when he tells Ash that he'll beat him next time. Due to the prolonged nature of this battle, evening has fallen by the time it is over, and so Mullane invites the trio to spend the night again. The next morning during breakfast, Ash takes special care to check over Kommo-o the way Cynthia had taught him using Garchomp. Thankfully, the old wound that the young dragon received as a Jangmo-o hasn't reopened, and in truth, the scar it left is even hard to find due to all the new thick scales his best friend has grown in recent weeks. Praising his partner, Ash promises they'll get in some special training soon so nothing like the battle with Guzma can happen again, fair fight or not. Suddenly though, his dragon's eyes narrow, and he quickly shuts past Ash before bolting off into the woods as if enraged by something. Shocked and concerned, Ash instantly gives chase, but quickly realizes he needs to begin joining a starter in endurance and speed training, as even at his top speed, he still lags well behind Kommo-o. After catching his breath a bit and realizing the search would be too difficult on his own, Ash releases Rufflet and asks him to be his eye in the sky, as together they begin investigating whatever set his starter off like that. Meanwhile with Kommo-o, he continues in hot pursuit of the flash of cobalt he had seen through the window. Though it had only been there for a second, he had known deep in his soul that this was Poniard up to something again, and as he entered the woods, he had seen it once again, confirming his hunch. Fury blossoms in the adolescent Drake, as he thinks of how sick he is of the traitor not accepting Ash's rejection. And this is only compounded by horrid images of what this monster might do to smaller members of his family, like Marowak or Brion if he gets his blades on them. These powerful emotions drive Kommo-o on, as he stoically readies himself for battle with his nemesis. One way or the other, this ends today.
A few moments later, Hunter and Quarry burst into a small grotto populated with a few flowers, tall trees, and a wall of stone that even Poniard cannot scale. Seeing that his enemy is cornered, Kommo-o snarls at the untrustworthy dark type, while Poniard surprisingly stays quiet, pointing its blades in the direction they'd come, as if ordering Kommo-o to leave. The sight of those blades pointed at him makes Kommo-o go berserk, and as unresolved trauma pushes him forward, he lunges at Poniard, ready to deliver a sky uppercut. Again though, Poniard doesn't act like its usual self, instead dodging and attempting to run away. However, Kommo-o assumes that this is simply to lead him into some kind of trap, or a more advantageous battlefield for Poniard, and so uses his tail to cut off the steel type's escape route, before smacking it back into a tree, hard enough to send a crack up the trunk. Shaking the cobweb cobwebs off its rattled brain, Poniard narrowly regains focus in time to raise its bladed hands defensively as Kommo-o slams a second sky uppercut into it. However, this does little to reduce the damage, as the force causes the tree to splinter further and further until it is clearly about to fall. Suddenly, Poniard's demeanor changes, as it too seems to become enraged. Its head then gains a metallic glow as it bashes its skull against Kommo-o's with incredible force, strong enough to cause the dragon to reel back, flinching and clutching its ringing head, leaving it open to a follow-up. However, instead of taking the opportunity, Poniard turns its back on its rival and stabs its blades into the quickly falling tree, scaling at incredible and nimble speeds. It then slashes at the leaves atop it and suddenly dives through them to retrieve something, landing safely on the other side just as the tree hits the ground with a loud boom that kicks up a small dust cloud. Rage-filled haze lifting a bit, Kommo-o looks on in complete confusion and slight worry as he realizes this has clearly gone too far and he is to blame more than Poniard for the destruction of the tree. Suddenly, Poniard appears from the other side of the downed tree, using its arms to support a bundle of leaves and branches. On closer inspection, Kommo-o sees that cradled in them are two incredibly young Pichu who are bawling their eyes out as they clutch onto Poniard for comfort after their home was destroyed, with them nearly sharing its fate. A supreme sense of guilt overtakes Kommo-o as he sprints over to check on the young creatures, but they squeak in terror at the sight of him and suddenly scurry out of Poniard's grasp and further into the woods, far out of sight. Silently, the two Pokemon watch the babies leave, before making eye contact. Though the tension still exists between them, neither feel much like fighting anymore.
The silence is only broken by the soft flapping and chirping of Rufflet, who soon begins circling overhead. Realizing this means Ash will be coming here soon, Poniard once again turns his back to leave, when Kommo-o grabs his arm and demands to know why it helped the Pichu. The blue-bladed Mon quickly jerks his limb back and grunts that it doesn't owe the dragon an explanation, to which Kommo-o agrees and apologizes for losing himself, as well as offering a begrudging thanks for Poniard cleaning up its mess. Coolly, Poniard goes to suggest that this is hardly the first time, but as its eyes fall on the scar left on Kommo-o, it holds its tongue, instead giving its rival a stiff nod that says, "Don't get used to it." Suddenly, Ash's voice cuts through the grotto, as he runs to the source of the loud noise he'd heard, only to find Kommo-o and a very unwelcome face. Furiously, Ash yells at his former Pokemon to stop following him, asking if it really can't take a hint, and reiterating his point from when he banished it, that he doesn't want a Pokemon who only cares about itself and victory. Poniard responds by giving Ash that same look that he did back in Guzma's office, and to him, it seems like a haughty sneer. However, having just seen Poniard's heroism with the baby Pichu, Kommo-o sees its rival's meaning more clearly than his trainer. It isn't trying to goad or mock him. Poniard is showing its pride in its own growth of character, and urging Ash to look deeper than the surface, to give it a second chance and see how much it's changed. But Kommo-o also knows that it is Ash's love for him which continues to fuel his anger with Poniard, and so if there's to be any hope of reconciliation, Kommo-o has to be the first to forgive. Giving Poniard a measured look that says, "Make me regret this and I'll crush you like a soda can," the dragon steps in between it and its trainer, and begins to explain what it just witnessed. Even though Ash cannot speak the language of Pokemon, he cannot mistake the passion in his partner's voice, and when Kommo-o begins to gesture first to the felled tree, then to Poniard, and finally to a deeper part of the forest, he tries his best to figure out what is being said. At first, he assumes that Kommo-o is angry, and is perhaps recounting how Poniard lured him into the forest only to drop a tree on him. But when a pair of small yellow Pokemon scurry out of the area Kommo-o is pointing to, and leap into Poniard's arms with the orange berries they picked as a thank you for the steel type, something completely unexpected clicks into place. In a disbelieving voice, Ash half asks, half states, "You saved them?" To which Poniard responds by taking several steps forward, and then bowing its head, taking a knee in front of Ash in a gesture of humility. This display confuses Ash deeply. But thankfully by now, Lily, Kiawe, and Sophocles have made their way to Ash's position, and so he looks to them for guidance. Kiawe and Sophocles have nothing to contribute, the latter having never even seen Poniard before. However, Lily smiles, and says this is what she was talking about back at Ula Ula Meadow, and that she believes Poniard is finally ready to work as a team, if Ash is willing to meet her halfway. Hesitantly, Ash returns his gaze to Poniard, and remains quiet for a bit, somewhat wondering what his mother would do or say in the same position, before remembering his mom's opinion doesn't matter right now. This is on him. Slowly he reaches out to Poniard's rusty head, and though the creature initially flinches away from the gesture, it soon recognizes Ash's intent, and at last, leans into the affection. Smiling, Ash extends his other hand, vowing that if Poniard is willing to work with him, he will do everything in his power to help it continue cultivating both its strength and the compassion it has acquired in its time away. Tears prick the sharp blade Pokemon's eyes, as she extends her arm and carefully shakes with Ash, using the back of her blade as a contact point, formally marking the return of Poniard to Ash's team.
Briefly, Ash considers using a normal Pokeball to reseal his commitment with Poniard, but upon realizing the weight of the reforged bond, now tells the creature to wait with Lily and Kiawe, as he makes a trip into town for a few things. cousins? Dutifully, Pawnyard agrees to this and watches as Ash leaves while Lily expresses her joy at Pawnyard being back and even offers to help clean the rust off it again, since she still has the rest of that oil she used before, having bought a new one for herself out of fear of the damage it could have been doing to her hair. Happily, the steel type accepts the offer, and the pair eagerly run off to begin doing just that. This leaves just Kiawe and the cousins, with Mullane commenting that their friends are certainly young and energetic, before suddenly being drawn away by the ringing of the video phone. Sitting down to answer, the face of Professor Kukui suddenly pops on screen, with a cheery alola and a greeting to his friend, before a mischievous grin crosses his face as he says he has some fun news to pass along to Mullane's guests. Meanwhile, Ash returns to the observatory a few minutes later with some newly purchased items in a bag. Seeing no one to greet him, he calls out for Pawnyard, and then Lily and Kiawe before hearing their voices from outside the back of the house. Heading back outside, he sees Pawnyard being polished by Lily and Kiawe as it sits in a large metallic bath he assumes is usually used for Mullane and Sophocles' Pokemon. However, it seems they're having trouble scrubbing off all the accumulated rust with Lily's hair oil alone. This is when Ash chuckles and produces one of his purchases, Industrial Rust Remover, that is thankfully safe for use on steel types. When the solution is added to its bathwater, the rust starts coming off much quicker, though there is only so much that the formula can get rid of. Thankfully, this is when Mullane and Sophocles join them, and with his steel type mastery, Mullane explains they are missing one last piece of the puzzle, before asking Sophocles to get his new little friends, and for the trio to step back from the metal bath and Pawnyard. Grinning, Sophocles acquiesces, revealing that he has taken the two baby Pichu into his care, and so whispers to the baby Pokemon that he needs their help. Chattering excitedly, the little electric types quickly nod before running up to the metal bath and nuzzling their cheeks against it, causing a weak electrical current to run through it, and thus through the rust removal solution and Pawnyard. Like magic, the rust begins to wash off like dirt, leaving Pawnyard a brilliant cobalt blue that's shinier than ever. Beaming proudly, Mullane happily explains the process of electrolysis to the children, and advises them to remember it if they ever find themselves helping an unfortunate steel type again. Nodding, Ash and Co promise to do so, as Pawnyard leaves from the bath and begins happily zooming around the backyard, having apparently been significantly slowed down by all the rust, a fact which excites Ash, who grins that he bets it'll be an even better battler now that it's clean. Mullane then remembers his reason for coming out to speak with the group, as he offers them some good news. Professor Kukui has invited them to Melee Melee in order to attend a surprise birthday party for Burnett. Lily beams at the sweet gesture, while Ash reasons that with his trial battle being a month away, such an excursion could be the perfect downtime the team need after the hell of Bowtown. Not to mention, he can show the professor his and Hakamo's progress. Mullane chuckles that this is good, since Kukui is already on his way, and will be here by this afternoon.
With that resolved, Ash and the others able to turn their attention back to Pawnyard, chasing it through the field behind the observatory. Lily, who has known Ash the longest out of the group, is relieved to see how freely he is acting now that Pawnyard is back, and it is only by seeing this that she realizes how much Pawnyard's banishment had been weighing down on her friend. Eventually, he manages to catch the blue rogue, leaping out and playfully tackling it. He then pulls something from his bag, saying that he got this for Pawnyard before revealing it to be a luxury ball. At first, Pawnyard seems a bit taken aback by the fancy new ball, but not wanting to spurn Ash's kindness. It gives its trainer a look that promises not to let itself go soft even in its new cushy home, then plants his bladed hand squarely on the button. At once, the small steel type is turned into red light and absorbed into the sphere, as Ash stows it on his belt, genuinely happy to have his team back together at last. Though it seems someone else is just as happy with this reunion, Mullane, who steps up to Ash and encourages him to be good to Pawnyard, since the loyalty of a steel type cannot be broken once it is forged. Ash vows that he will, and Mullane pats him on the back before dropping a small silvery stone into the boy's palm. Ash recognizes this must be a Stellanium Z at once, and tries to refuse the generous gift, but Mullane smiles that since he's given up competitive battling, his old Z crystal doesn't see much action, and if it could be put to better use helping reforge Ash and Pawnyard's bond, then that would make him very happy. Ash in turn smiles and nods, pocketing the silver stone with a promise that he won't squander this chance.
The group then return home for lunch, and for Ash to change out of his grass-stained clothes. Not long after that, are greeted by a booming Alola as Kukui strides proudly into the observatory. After dispensing his individual greetings to friends both new and old, Kukui tells the kids that they ought to make haste, since they still need to swing back past Color Island to collect Burnett's birthday cake, and they can't afford to be gone too long, since he told Burnett he was just nipping over here to help Mullane with his taxes. This causes Lily to burst into a fit of giggles as she asks why on earth the professor chose that as an excuse, causing Kukui to rub the back of his head and admit that he never was a very good liar, and he had to make something up on the fly. Mullane then adds his laughter to Lily's, saying that if that's the best he can come up with, how has he managed to maintain his secret ID? But before the former Kahuna candidate can finish, Kukui raises a finger in silent request for his friend to please stop talking. Taking the hint, Mullane places a finger to his lips, then tells Ash, Lily, and Kiawe they really should get going like the professor said. The trio all nod and thank Mullane and Sophocles for their hospitality, with the cousins saying it was their pleasure, parting on a high note. When they reach Kukui's boat, Ahira heroes find that they are not the only passengers the professor has. Sitting patiently on deck is the Evie that Ash saved from drowning back at the beginning of his journey. Recognizing Ash as his rescuer, Evie leaps from his position, trying to reach the boy. However, from where he was sitting, this is not physically possible, and Evie instead lands squarely in the water and starts drowning again. Ash once more leaps into the bay and manages to pull the normal type back onto the boat, before settling himself on deck with it. The others then climb aboard in a much drier manner, and Kukui sighs that this is the third time this week that Evie's nearly drowned. He then goes on to explain how a few days after Ash and Lily left, he was on his way to Akala when he saw Evie floundering off the coast. Since then he has kept the fluff ball at his lab to ensure that he doesn't hurt himself. But every time he goes out on the ocean, Evie insists on coming with him, and every time he seems to somehow get in trouble with the water, to the point where Kukui is seriously considering asking his wife to invent him an Evie-sized life jacket. Lily says that would probably be for the best, but for now she'll send out Finn. That way if Evie falls back in, he can save the fox. An act Kukui is grateful for, as it allows him to focus on getting them to Akala Island.
The trip is thankfully uneventful, and when they moor near Brooklet Hill, Kiawe has a sneaking suspicion that he knows where Kukui plans to get the cake from. When asked, Kukui confirms that ice cream cake is Burnett's favorite, so he ordered one from the best ice cream makers in all of Alola. At this, Kiawe proudly tells the professor that those are his parents, and Kukui says that's great, joking that means Kiawe can help him haggle the price down. They then all disembark, but instead of waiting patiently, Evie scampers off the ship with them. At first, they assume he just wants to follow Ash, as he has been ever since he saw him again. But to their surprise, the little fox Pokemon bolts right past him and begins charging up Route 5, as if his life depends on whatever is at the end of the path. Feeling responsible for Evie, Ash runs after the normal type, while his friends all yell at him to wait. For a second, indecision clouds Kukui and Kiawe's faces, as they are torn between following Ash and not keeping Burnett waiting on her birthday. But Lily has no such issue, and so takes charge, telling the guys to go see Kiawe's family and get the cake, while she and her Pokemon look after Ash. Kiawe nods full of faith in her, while Kukui puts a hand on her shoulder, smiling broadly that he's so proud of how far his former assistant has come, and how truly remarkable it is to see how confident and committed to her friend she is. Lily in turn beams back that none of this would be possible without him, Professor Burnett, and then turns on her heel to pursue her goal.
As the group splits up, Evie continues to run towards his unknown destination. However, Ash soon finds that even if he cannot tell what Evie wants, he does recognize where they're going, and feels his stomach sink as the normal type heads into lush jungle. Nonetheless, even though his last encounter with the denizens of that forest nearly ended with him becoming a Pokemon's lunch, he still refuses to let Evie go alone in such a dangerous place, and so recalls to mind his mother's words about fear before pushing onward. Finally, Evie stops ahead of him, and as he catches up, he realizes their ultimate destination is a small clearing in the jungle which holds a large moss-covered rock. Excitement radiates from the evolution Pokemon as he lays eyes on the mossy stone, and with a joyful yip, he suddenly leaps atop it, dancing around in elation as a bright light consumes him with evolutionary energy. After shielding his eyes, Ash laughs to see Eevee has become Leafeon. Running up to the newly minted grass type, he picks him up and congratulates him, before asking if Leafeon decided to evolve into a grass type because he didn't want to be bothered by the water. Leafeon nearly sings in confirmation, causing Ash to sweat drop and ask why the little creature didn't choose to become a water type Vaporeon. However, Leafeon this time barks in a way that Ash takes to mean, I don't like the water, so why would I want to become one with it when I can resist it instead? Ash can see the sense in this, but before he can say so, their conversation is interrupted by a shrill scream in the distance, and the sound of an explosion which instantly causes the pair to sprint off in that direction.
During her pursuit of Ash, Lily had been traversing the jungle far more slowly and carefully, making sure to keep her eyes on the trail her friend and Eevee had made, since if she were to get herself lost while trying to find Ash, it would be embarrassing on top of making the situation 10 times worse. However, even this approach sees things take a bad turn, as during her trek, something large and unconventionally menacing had stepped onto the path, and didn't seem very happy to see her or Snowy, that being the totem Lurantis from their last visit to the lush jungle. With a shrill cry of its name, Lurantis had raised his petal claws and released an energy ball at Lily and Snowy, who definitely dodged out of the way, but all the same, the impact of the attack had caused the ground to shake, summoning Ash and the newly evolved Leafeon to their side. Unfortunately, those two were not the only arrivals, as true to his bad habit, Bernie bursts from his Pokeball and clashes claws to the bigger and obviously stronger grass type in order to protect Lily. However, this act of gallantry is short-lived, as Bernie is quickly overpowered and sent sailing deeper into the jungle and out of sight. Though this sacrifice is not in vain, and wanting to avenge his friend, Snowy leaps into the fray, blasting Lurantis with Ice Beam. Meanwhile, upon seeing Lurantis, Leafeon has become quite excited for a chance to test his new abilities, charging towards the totem with Quick Attack and driving his new grassy frame into the bug. Seeing how little this is actually doing, Ash calls out to Leafeon, telling him not to simply depend on his old normal type moves anymore, and to listen to his new grass type instincts as well. But before Leafeon can do anything of the sort, Lurantis goes on the attack once more, having easily withstood the Quick Attack and now swiping at the grass cap with a powerful Leaf Blade. This sends Leafeon flying just like Bernie, only this time, Lurantis feels threatened, and so follows up immediately by rushing at Leafeon with great speed and sickly purple claws that drip with a deadly toxin for cross poison. Worriedly, Ash cries out for his little friend, but before the attack can hit, Ash's ears fill with the sound of searing flames, and on instinct more than logic, he tells Leafeon to use quick attack again to dodge. Loyally, the cat-like creature does as his bid, narrowly twisting out of the way thanks to the speed boost granted by the move, just as a gout of flames erupt from deep in the jungle.
A split second later, a Charmeleon comes roaring out of the foliage and slams headlong into Lurantis. Frantically, the grass type attempts to hold strong by imbuing its claws with the power of Leaf Blade, but with the solar power comes heat, which Charmeleon uses to burn its opponent even more, buying Ash and Leafeon a chance to regroup with Lily. The son of Cynthia then congratulates Bernie on his evolution, causing Lily to gasp and realize that he is right, as the once cute little Charmander now gives a cool thumbs up instead of the happy dance that always charmed her. Though she is not disappointed, far from it, as her eyes light up and she beams that somehow Bernie's even cuter now than ever. Meanwhile, Ash reaches down to pet Leafeon, stating that he'd once seen one of the Sinnoh gym leaders use another of its species while trying to earn the right to challenge his mother, and so encourages him to explore the possibility of his new blade-like tail, pointing out the Leaf Blade technique Lurantis had used to knock him around with. Leafeon growls at this and slaps his tail to the ground in irritation, though to his surprise, when he does, he feels his tail easily cut a small swath in the jungle brush. Blinking with surprise, Leafeon at last gets what Ash is saying, and this recognition comes not a moment too soon, as a second later, Bernie is knocked back, having put up a good fight, but ultimately been no match for a totem Pokemon. Lily cries out for her fiery friend, and as he rolls back, Leafeon once more takes to the field. However, he Lily points out a frightful truth about this battle. As it stands, none of their Pokemon can beat a totem alone, and they're too deep in Lurantis' territory to run, so this may be one of those times where it's fine to bend the rules for the sake of survival, like when they took Po Town. Nodding grimly, Ash apologizes to Leafeon about its test of strength needing to be superseded. However, the grass type doesn't seem all that bothered, as Kommo-o, Marowak, and Brionne take to the field to back it up. As one, the team of Pokemon in tandem with Snowy, Bernie, and Leafeon fire off the most devastating attacks, and when the dust settles, Lurantis falls forward, its eyes spirals as its powerful aura recedes.
Letting out a collective sigh, Ash and Co gather in to celebrate the victory, with the son of Cynthia assuring a worried Lily that Lurantis will likely be fine, but they need to get their way out of this jungle and back to Paniola Ranch ASAP. Luckily, Leafeon's unerring sense of direction extends to more than just mossy rocks, and it is quick to point them down the path Bernie made, which on closer inspection, Ash and Lily see as the direction to the jungle's exit. However, they both know they will still have to cover a lot of ground to meet with the others, a problem Ash at least has a solution for, as he casually asks Lily how well she feels bonded to Meanie now. Beaming, the girl smugly snorts in an eerily similar way to her bull Pokemon that things are much better since the desert battle. But then, her smile falters, as she recognizes what he's suggesting. The next thing Lily knows, she is mounted on old Meanie, having called him out and requested passage on his back. Though, he had tried to intimidate her like always by leaning down and snorting in her face. When the girl had not faltered though, he simply dropped to his knees with something akin to a gaze of respect, surprisingly letting everyone hop on before taking off in a powerful gallop. Despite the distance, Meanie's colossal size and immense strength allows him to cross it in no time. And though it is hardly a comfortable ride, the Totem Toro soon has them back at Paniola Ranch.
Dismounting the creature that once plagued this place, Ash and Lily run up to the professor and the ranchers, and though their clothes are stained with sweat and the remnants of flora and fauna poke out of their hair, matching wide grins are plastered on both Lily and Ash's faces. Rengo and Seema are thrilled to see the pair and are now more seemingly well-adjusted old Meanie, and Kukui is even more enamored when Ash and Lily begin detailing how they took on a totem Pokemon and prevailed thanks to their teamwork in an impromptu horde battle, as well as the evolutions of the Pokemon fighting by their side. While the professor lets his inner nerd out and examines the newly evolved Leafeon and Charmeleon, Kiawe lightly bemoans the missed opportunity to help his friends and get some training in, since as per Nanu's advice, he has made the decision to return home and challenge Olivia after Ash's Grand Trial battle with Nanu. Ash claps him on the back, saying that's a great idea, while Rengo goes to fetch a small wooden box, which he presents to Kiawe, saying that he and Seema have been holding on to this treasure in case his son ever needs it. Kiawe humbly thanks his parents and opens it to see a rare firestone. Smiling, Seema states that her father found that buried under some ash on Wella Volcano, and always hoped the fire it would imbue would burn just as passionately as the volcano. Kiawe promises that it will, stowing the stone away for another time. Now with Ash having a new team member, Lily a new evolution, Kiawe a new treasure, and Kukui a new cake, the group return to the boat with a promise they'll come back for a feast before the Pokemon League. As expected, Ash's Leafeon falls in the water again, but like he indicated to Ash back on the rock, the water no longer bothers him, and he paddles merrily until Lily has Finn scoop him up and bring him back to the boat, so they can set sail for Melee Melee.
By the time they reach the beach shack, night is falling, and Kukui is worried that Burnett would be mad at him for taking so long. But when the group enter, it causes a yell of surprise instead of anger, as Professor Burnett is overcome with joy, especially at seeing Lily and Ash again. Giving her husband a peck on the cheek, she tells him that she figured he was plotting something for her birthday, but didn't expect him to go all the way to Ulu to fetch these two. Kukui blushes and says there is one more surprise guest on his way, but he won't be here until later. This piques Burnett's curiosity, and she playfully pesters him all through the party games that follow. During this time, she also becomes acquainted with Kiawe, and takes a shine to the boy for how polite he is, growing even more interested when he shows off his Cantonian Vulpix. Burnett admits to having never seen one in person, since even though she studied in Unova for a while, they were always rare even there. Lily then shows off Snowy to allow the professor to compare, and at once it is clear that the two Vulpix are as different as ice and fire. While Lily's Vulpix holds himself with the pride of a natural prodigy who has been adored since the moment he was born, Kiawe's is timid, after his long-standing mistreatment by Bilge and Cassidy. Though under Kiawe's care, it has managed to come out of his shell a bit more, it is still anxious around new people, and so whimpers and recoils when Burnett reaches out to touch it, assuming that she is going to hit it. Kiawe explains the source of this neurosis, as well as his plan to offer it the Firestone, since perhaps the boost in power will help it gain some confidence. However, Burnett encourages the young man not to be too hasty, since evolution can be a traumatic process in and of itself, and for a Pokemon who has lived much of his life being helpless, the notion that its trainer who it thought it could trust would force it to change into something else beyond his control could permanently damage both his self-confidence and his bond with Kiawe. Kiawe admits that he never thought about it like that, and promises not to rush into evolution. He then ruffles the tuft of fur on Vulpix's head, and tells her that they can tell him when, if ever, it is ready to evolve. The Fire Fox yips happily, and Burnett gives her final bit of advice, that the two Vulpix go play, since socializing them together might be good for them both. Kiawe and Lily agree, and so guide the pair of Pokemon to Lily's old room where they can play safely.
As this happens, the surprise guest Kukui mentioned earlier finally arrives, and it is none other than the Masked Royal himself. With Incineroar by his side, Alola's hero bursts through the beach shack's doors and proudly announces that he's here to put on a show for the lucky birthday girl. Having a huge crush on the Masked Royal, Burnett can't help but fangirl and yells for Kukui to come take a picture of her with the wrestler. However, the Royal quickly states that Kukui just nipped out to... He then pauses, looking a little panicked, before rather lamely finishing with, "Help Hala with his taxes?" This last word is said more as a question, and while Burnett mutters that her husband really should open an accountancy firm with how many people have wanted him to help with their taxes over the last few months, Lily gives the Masked Royal a questioning look. Trying to move past this, he asks who wants to be his battle partner for this birthday exhibition match, and at once Ash is on his feet, excited to have this chance to battle someone who held his own against his mother. The Masked Royal seems equally pleased by this decision, and so invites Ash and the others to join him on the beach for what he knows will be a terrific battle.
Eagerly, the Royal asks how many Pokemon Ash has, with the boy responding 6, causing the rest to grin that in that case, their battle will be a full 6-on-6. Then with an excitable cheer of "Let's go," he releases his first team member, the Dark and Fire type Incineroar. Ash grins at the opportunity to take on a Pokemon that sought to defeat his mother's Garchomp, as he obviously calls on Kommo-o to see where they stack up to such an opponent. As the battle begins, Ash calls for a Sky Uppercut, while the Royal counters with a Bulk Up, causing the large feline to flex and seemingly swell with power for an instant, allowing it to easily tank the super effective blow. The Royal then tells his friend to follow up with the Darkest Lariat, and at once, Incineroar begins to spin in high speeds, clashing its dark energy-coated claws against Kommo-o's, proving itself the obvious stronger of the duo thanks to the enhanced power of Bulk Up. However, Ash's starter fights back valiantly, going blow for blow with the heal Pokemon, a laudable feat that does not escape either the Royal or Incineroar's notice. Suddenly, a gleam comes to both their eyes as the Royal Z-Ring ignites and he crosses his arms, telling Incineroar to get fired up and incinerate the ring with a malicious moonsault. More Z-power than Ash has ever encountered before suddenly bursts from within the fire type as it leaps powerfully into the air, its body alight with dark flames. However, Ash and Kommo-o are far from beaten, channeling their own Z-power which blazes nearly as impressively as the Royals and his partners, making the hero of Alola tremble with excitement. Grinning widely, Ash calls for a Hala's signature move, and the duo executed in a way that will make the old man proud. With a barrage of spectral fists flying up at Incineroar, who is now coming down, its bulked up body aimed right at Kommo-o. Each impact causes a minor explosion as Incineroar breaks through the fists, though as the Z-move's name would suggest, it is an all-out pummeling, which is clearly leaving its mark on the part Dark type. It is anyone's guess who will come out the victor. But as the two collide with enough force to send the beach's sands 50 feet into the air, the match comes to an end, with Incineroar rising back to his feet while Kommo-o lies pancaked on the ground.
Briefly, the heal Pokemon attempts to taunt its fallen foe, but before it can, a spasm runs through its body and it is forced to drop to a knee, clearly on the verge of fainting as well. Both trainers then return their aces and nod to each other, as Ash then calls forth Rufflet and the Royal his Braviary. Naturally, the martially minded Rufflet is eager to prove itself to its evolved form, though remembering the lessons it's learned thus far, it does not go in for a head-on attack, instead making the wind its weapon. Thankfully, this beach battlefield is perfect for such tactics, with Rufflet using Air Slash to whip up blades blades of sand which fly at Braviary. However, the majestic eagle is not about to take this lying down, and at the royal's order launches itself into the air. At such distance it has plenty of lead time to dodge the incoming air slashes, but this is not the only threat it poses, as once it has ascertained that it can avoid them at range, the royal has it close in on Rufflet, forcing the match into a close quarters one. Suddenly things have gone from bad to worse for Rufflet, and though it puts up a good fight, all it takes is a well-placed steel wing from its physically inclined final form to drive it into the ground, where it lays unconscious, putting the match definitively in the favour of the masked royal. Next up for Ash is Leafeon, a choice which makes his friend's face fall, with Kiawe heatedly asking if the son of Cynthia is trying to throw the match. However, with a serene confidence reminiscent of his mother, Ash replies that he has a strategy, and more importantly, he trusts Leafeon to be able to win this. He then tells the grass type to use Quick Attack to gain some altitude. A wise decision, as at that moment, the royal has ordered a wing attack in the hope of taking Leafeon out in one hit. Yipping his understanding, Leafeon springs into the air, kicking off with enough force that for a moment he seems to be running along the sky. Not wanting to let their prey get away, Braviary follows Leafeon up, but thankfully this is all part of Ash's plan, as he tells the verdant Pokemon to use Quick Attack again and get on Braviary's back. Quick as a flash, Leafeon kicks off thin air and is propelled sideways into Braviary, who squawks in pain as the grass type collides headfirst with its back. Then, to add insult to injury, Leafeon jabs his leafy tail into Braviary, anchoring himself in place with a leaf blade, courtesy of his battle with Lurantis. This greatly aggravates Braviary, who tries unsuccessfully to throw off its unwelcome passenger. All the while, Leafeon continues to hammer at its wing joint with headbutts. Seeing that aerial maneuvers aren't the answer, the royal tells Braviary to dive, planning on slamming Leafeon into the ground. However, there is one problem with this strategy, and that is Leafeon. Being smart enough to see the plan from a mile off, he allows himself to be carried down at exhilarating speeds, then when the ground is close enough for a soft landing, detaches his leaf blade and kicks off Braviary's head to hop down safely. Unfortunately for the eagle, this two-legged kick to the skull leaves it disorientated, and so instead of pulling up at the last second as planned, it instead plummets face first into the sand with a mighty crash, rendering itself unconscious, while Leafeon prances over, begging for another ride.
All gaiety leaves the grass mammal's face when he sees his next opponent, however, as with a grin, the masked royal returns Incineroar to the field. Knowing how bad a matchup this is for Leafeon, Ash recalls him, then reaches for Brionne's ball. But before he can lay a hand on it, the luxury ball clipped on his belt burst open, with Pontiac materializing at his side. Eagerly, the steel dark type raises his bladed hands, desperately wanting to go around with the Pokemon that defeated his rival, but then it stops itself, looking up at Ash. Dropping to one knee in a gesture of humility, Pontiac meets his trainer's eyes, its meaning clear. I have sworn my blades to you, and so I'll only fight if you allow it. Recognizing the significance of this, as well as how much Pontiac has grown from the predatory being who would maim a downed enemy in spite of his protests, Ash gives it a smile, choosing to reward its loyalty with fate, as he nods telling it to get out there and finish Incineroar off. Warbling determinedly, the Sharp Blade Pokemon rises to his feet, and on Burnet's command to resume, runs in blades flashing. Though Incineroar has had time to rest from its battle with Kommo-o, it is far from being at full strength, and so lunges in with a cross chop, hoping the dual type squad weakness and status of a first stage Pokemon fighting a fully evolved one will make it unable to withstand one of these. However, Ash calls for Pontiac to leap back and keep itself in the battle longer with an iron defense that sees its already shiny body take on an extremely reflective metal sheen. This up defense proves to be its salvation, as when the cross chop hits, Pontiac not only isn't knocked out, but is able to stand its ground, leaving it close enough to lash out with a retaliatory Brick Break. This super effective blow is the last thing Incineroar or the Royal were expecting, and their surprise makes them vulnerable to a repeat of the same trick, this time having the added effect of sending Incineroar skidding back as it had intended to do to Pontiac. Beaming, Ash tells the Cobalt Blue Sharp Blade Pokemon to rush in for one more Brick Break, while just as excitedly, the Royal cries for his partner to do the same with Flare Blitz. Orange energy clashing with flames as the two Pokemon collide, and for a moment it is anyone's guess who will come out on top. But then, a devious glint fills Pontiac's eyes, as it darts out with its other bladed hand, uppercutting Incineroar with a surprise secondary Brick Break to the chin that mirrors its rival's signature move. This sneak attack finally proves too much for Incineroar, who is knocked off his feet and slams back into the ground with swirls in its eyes. Looking over to Ash, Pontiac then gives a respectful bow, acknowledging that this one would not have been possible without his trainer. And yes, even that this victory was a team effort that would have not been possible without Kommo-o either.
Grinning from ear to ear, the Masked Royal praises Pontiac's sheer tenacity, as well as how it pairs nicely with Ash's tranquil and focused spirit. However, what he's about to show them is something he doubts even their best teamwork can beat. A brand new Pokemon with overwhelming defensive power. He then lifts a heavy ball from his belt, and manages to throw it a far enough distance to release his own metallic creature, though this one is indeed completely alien to the well-travelled son of Sinnoh's champion, boasting a mostly chrome-looking liquid body, studded with large and obviously dense metallic hexagonal nuts, like those used for heavy construction. The Royal then introduces Melmetal as a previously undiscovered Pokemon he'd helped to stop during a totem-powered filled rampage a few months back on Ula Ula. From the sidelines, Bennett excitedly asks if that's where he met Kukui, grinning that he also helped calm that creature. Nodding vigorously, the Royal claims that she's absolutely right, and it was then that Kukui asked him to appear today, while Lily gives an amused little sniff and mutters something under her breath that sounds awfully like subtle. Either because he missed it or because he is choosing to ignore it, the Royal does not respond, instead turning his attention back to Ash and asking if he's ready to begin. When the boy nods enthusiastically, Melmetal lifts its heavy arms and warbles out a metallic cheer before slamming them into the ground, hard enough to vibrate Ash and Pawniard's bones a bit. The Royal then questions if his young opponent has any interest in switching Pawniard out, but when the Dark Steel type expresses its strong desire to remain in the battle with the obviously more powerful Steel type, Ash shakes his head, causing the match to begin in earnest. Figuring the speed advantage is theirs, Ash orders Pawniard to circle behind Melmetal and attack its blind spot with Brick Break, a feat the little shiny Pokemon is more than capable of, showing off its impressive speed as it creates a blue blur and dashes around the bulky Steel type. However, by virtue of its amorphous form, Melmetal is able to counter this by spinning its upper body at high speed to use Double Iron Bash, an attack which forces the smaller Pokemon to clash its glowing blades with Melmetal's Hex Nuts, not to test its strength, but to survive.
Knowing that it cannot maintain this stalemate for long, Pawniard uses its smaller size to its advantage, leaping onto one of Melmetal's outstretched arms, and running up it to deliver 2 direct blows of Brick Break directly onto what Ash assumes is the creature's head. Just as they finally land an attack that seems to stagger their behemoth opponent, the Royal calls for a dynamic punch and take advantage of the close range. Mercifully, speed again saves Pawniard as he leaps from Melmetal's shoulders, and as the Hex Nut fist goes flying towards Melmetal's head, Ash hopes that maybe this creature can be defeated the same way as Hollis Crabominable. This is a vain hope, however, as the gooey Steel type's body molds out of the way at the Royal's call, with the hero of Alola somehow having heard of this battle with the Kahuna. The Masked Royal then declares that he is ready to end this, calling for a Hyper Beam, and at once, the air trembles as condensed energy begins to fire from the black orb in the center of Melmetal's golden Hex Nut. Desperately, Ash orders Pawniard to use its Iron Defense again in hopes of taking advantage of the metallic sheen for a sly last-minute counter to reflect Hyper Beam back at Melmetal, like a poor man's mirror coat. This is surprisingly effective, as the massive attack at first consumes Pawniard, before suddenly imploding on itself, as the excess energy that normally would have dissipated into the air uselessly instead ends up being fired back into Melmetal's sturdy body, forcing it to endure a portion of the damage. Valiantly, Pawniard lays down a challenge to see whose Steel-type endurance will hold out the longest, though Melmetal has the advantage of not having fought a battle before this, and so when the Hyper Beam ends, is the one still standing. Nonetheless, Ash is immensely proud of the attempt and the synchronicity he can feel growing between himself and Pawniard, running into the center of the battlefield and giving it a hug. From his end of the field, the Masked Royal goes wild over this amazing after counter, stating his desire to study it further before thanking Ash for such an amazing battle so far. Feeling fired up by this challenge from someone on par with his mom, Ash places his full faith and trust in Marowak, as he chooses him and calls his friend to the field. Resting his bone on his shoulder, the now much braver creature stares up at Melmetal, with its demeanor completely cool and collected, showing a lot of Ash and Cynthia's confidence has rubbed off on the Ghost and Fire type, along with its evolution. As the battle begins, Ash wastes no time in instructing Marowak to fire off 2 spectral flames from his club, and though the Royal attempts to have his friend dodge, its heavy bulk is unable to avoid them, resulting in a terrible burn that causes Melmetal to visibly glow red hot. From here on, Melmetal is continuously plagued by its burn, with the heat sapping its strength and putting the Royal in a quickly ticking clock. All the while, Marowak's confidence has only grown from the success, causing the Fire Spirit to press its advantage. Thanks to Marowak's fire typing, he is still able to hit the glowing glob of burning metal without repercussion, and between that, his nimbleness from being smaller, and the burn afflicting Melmetal, it is only a matter of time before David fells Goliath.
Now tied up at 3 Pokemon each, the Royal brings out a Pokemon Ash is very familiar with, as it is named to his homeland, Empoleon. Knowing the steep disadvantage Marowak will be at in this fight, Ash recalls his Spectral Swordsman, and in his place brings out Leafeon, who is raring to go after his break. Nodding, the Royal calls this a wise decision considering Marowak's weakness to water, though he does point out how Empoleon's Steel typing reduces its own grass weakness, meaning if Ash had been banking on type matchups to win in this fight, he'll need to think again. Grinning, Ash replies he already knew about the Steel typing. The reason he chose Leafeon is because the Grass Cat's goal is to overcome water, and what better way than through toppling a powerful water type. Stroking his chin, the Royal acknowledges that it speaks well of him as a trainer that he would take this gamble to help his Pokemon achieve their dream, though that doesn't mean he can take it easy on them. In fact, if he is to truly make the achievement worth anything, he'll have to go all out.
With this declaration made, the Royal takes the first move, having Empoleon charge forth with Metal Claw, while Ash has Leafeon meet it with a Leaf Blade. A loud clang fills the beach as the pair of blades cross, but unfortunately for the grass type, Empoleon is far more familiar with this move, overpowering Leafeon and sending him crashing into the waves. Urgently, Ash tells his friend to get back to shore, but it seems the Masked Royal has other ideas, having Empoleon slide on its belly into the surf, turning this into a water battle. To his credit, Leafeon is now a capable swimmer, but against a Pokemon the people of Hisui once called the Master of the Waves, with the Emperor Penguin soaring through the water like a torpedo and slamming into the grass type almost a dozen times before he can even react to the first hit. Finally, a well-placed drill peck from directly underneath Leafeon sends him flying into the air, and as the helpless cat flails, Empoleon snipes him with a hydro pump, dropping his unconscious body back into the beach and proving that he still has a long way to go before he can truly say he has conquered the ocean.
Once more the match is back in the Royals' favour, but Ash doesn't let this get to him, bringing out his final Pokemon, that being Brion. In a voice filled with passion, the young son of Cynthia cries for his water star to hop into the surf and show Empoleon who's boss. However, to his surprise, the pop star Pokemon instead hops in the opposite direction, heading straight for the Royal and nuzzling him affectionately. Blinking twice, Ash comments that Brion really seems to like him, but the wrestler merely shrugs that he has that effect on water types. He then kneels down and in a small voice tells Brion that he's happy to see her too, but she really has to get back to Ash so they can have their battle. Brion's only response is to lick the Royal's cheek, causing him to laugh fondly, but all the same he remains insistent, saying he really wants to see how much she's grown, and this at last convinces the Azure Seal to return to her trainer. Leaping into the surf as Ash commanded, Brion and Empoleon begin their aquatic duel. Like with Leafeon, Empoleon attempts to use its enhanced swimming speed to overwhelm its opponent, but unlike the last battle, the water is also Brion's element. With this exact beach being where Kukui would often let her frolic, and have her do practice battles with the other starters. This place is home, and there is no way she's going to lose here of all places. Massing the water around her, the second stage starter flies at her final form foe with Aqua Jet, clashing with his Drill Peck, and creating a brief stalemate before they go skidding past each other. Unsatisfied with this outcome, the dueling duo repeat the feat, clashing over and over again with increasing speeds. The force of their impacts causes the surface of the water to froth and ripple, while Ash concernedly asks if he thinks Brion and Empoleon will be alright. Grinning proudly, the Royal tells his young friend that he is certain they will, commenting how Brion's come a long way from the timid little Poplio he once knew. Curiously, Ash asks when the Royal met his Poplio, causing the wrestler to freeze up in a look of utter horror, until Lily mildly suggests that perhaps Professor Kukui helps the Masked Royal with his taxes as well. While the Royal can tell the girl is teasing him, he is not about to give up a perfectly usable excuse, and so claims that she is right, before hastily getting everyone to focus on the battle once more. By now, Empoleon and Brion have whipped the calm beach into a maelstrom, with each being astride a giant wave. Staring each other down, the two water types prepare to clash one more time, but as the Royal has Empoleon charge with the wave to its back to give speed and power to its eventual impact, Ash instead has Brion use the move it learned against Guzma, Aqua Ring. Using her voice to harness the wave, Brion molds it into a new shape, an intricate cage that whips around the Popstar Pokemon protectively, bathing her in a healing aura. However, this is not its only function, as suddenly, Empoleon's enhanced speed and power has become a detriment, with it plowing headlong into the watery shield at full force, stunning it and rendering it unable to escape being hit with its own crashing wave. Thanks to the way Aqua Ring is always spinning, Brion is able to avoid the worst of this, but the same cannot be said for Empoleon, who a few moments later floats back to the surface, belly up and with spiral eyes.
As the Aqua Ring fades with the Brion having seemingly recovered all her health, she happily floats back onto the sand, with Ash patting her head and praising her amazing effort beating Empoleon. The Royal also adds his compliments, though warns Ash and Brion that they might struggle against his next Pokemon, as he brings out an Alolan Executor. Being quad resistant to water, Ash is inclined to agree, thinking maybe he should swap Marowak back in, but it seems Brion has other ideas, growling with the confidence that Ash has never seen her exhibit before. Wanting to encourage this growing determination, Ash tells Brion that he's counting on her, and as the little seal pup yips into light, Burnett tells them to begin. Wasting no time, the Royal has his Executor open with a Dragon Hammer, resulting in the behemoth dropping its three heads directly onto Brion's single much smaller one. Thankfully, she is able to summon a nose bubble to dampen some of the impact, but it is a little more than a band-aid as the painful impact smacks her into the hard-packed sand before she is sent skittering into the air. From here, a volley of razor-sharp leaves slice Brion as the Executor fires off a powerful leaf storm. And as she crashes through the surface of the water several meters away, it is plain to see that all the healing she received from Aqua Ring is now gone, with the seal starter barely clinging on to consciousness. Distantly, Brion can feel herself sinking, though it is almost like it is happening with someone else. The water all around her is pleasantly cool, soothing her aching body, and as its embrace wraps tighter around her, she thinks idly of how nice it would be to just close her eyes and accept unconsciousness here in the deep blue. She did her best, and now she's so very tired. But then, words ring in her ears, words she's heard before. "I'm counting on you." Ash had said those words. He had put his faith in her, chosen her, and now she would choose him, to fight on for his sake, despite wishing to rest. However, to do so, she would have to make one other all-important choice.
Up on the beach, Ash cries out for Brienne, wading up to his waist in the salty water to look for any sign of her. She's been in there too long, and he's starting to get worried. Just as the royal goes to call for an end to the match so he can send Empoleon to search the ocean floor for the presumably fainted water type, a sound fills everyone's ears, an ethereal melody like the song of a siren. Then, the water all around Ash begins to glow, as a new figure rises up to float beside the boy, a majestic Primarina. Face splitting in a grin, Ash throws his arms around Primarina, beaming that he's so happy she's okay, and when the soloist Pokemon licks his face affectionately, Ash asks if she's able to keep battling. Barking the affirmative, the match is called to continue, with Primarina immediately breaking out into the same ethereal song from before. At once, water droplets rise from the ocean and converge on the tip of Primarina's nose, more and more of them, until they create an orb the size of Ash's head, then his body, and finally bigger than Ash himself. Warning Exeggutor that this is Primarina's signature move, Sparkling Aria, the royal calls for another leaf storm, but before the leafy barrage can make contact with Primarina, she lobs the giant orb of water at the palm tree, swallowing up the leaves and striking with enough force to make Exeggutor stagger. However, even off balance, the royal finds a way to turn the situation into a powerful attack, having Exeggutor use the momentum of its stumbling to swing its head back at Primarina with even more force. Urgently, Ash cries for the Singing Seal to counter this, with Primarina deftly whipping her tail up to block. Thanks to a newly acquired fairy typing, this impromptu Dragon Hammer is completely powerless against her, with the royal grinning that he's glad to see Ash has been keeping up with his type matchups. Blinking in confusion, Ash asks what the royal means, with the hero of Alola sweat dropping as he realizes Ash only passed his little test by sheer dumb luck. Though he guesses for all the good traits his old friend passed on to her son, an absent-minded streak isn't the worst thing he could have inherited from Cynthia. Recomposing himself, the royal explains that Primarina is now part fairy type, a fact which makes Ash's eyes go wide as he asks if she knows any fairy type moves. Nodding happily, Primarina begins singing at top volume, as from her lips burst dozens of heart-shaped rings which strike the palm tree Pokemon and make it thrash in discomfort. Concerned for his friend in his voice, the royal urges Exeggutor to get away, but with its lumbering frame, its movements are too slow to escape the range of Primarina's sight, and subsequently her song. As a result, it does not take long at all for the palm tree to be felled, putting Ash in the lead for once, as the masked royal is forced to return Exeggutor and bring out his final Pokemon.
However, instead of pulling out a Pokeball like he has for all the rest, he instead sticks 2 fingers in his mouth and whistles loudly. Suddenly, from inside the beach shack, an electric voice calls that it is coming. Then to Ash's shock, an electric appliance he can't quite recognize with an irritated digital face on its screen slowly floats from the window of Kukui's lab to join them on the beach. Sighing, the strange machine asks if it really has to do this. But the royal just grins that the two of them haven't battled in ages, and it'll be fun. Sighing deeper this time, the red gadget then drops into the royal's hands, and shrinks a bit as if shedding its skin, revealing the denizen of the device to be one Ash knows thanks to a certain Sinnoh gym leader, the electric poltergeist Pokemon Rotom. Excitedly, Burnett points out that she knows that Rotom is the one Kukui is using for his Pokédex prototype, a fact the royal confirms, explaining he let the professor borrow it from him from time to time when he's not battling. And he figured since he's not here, he won't be missing his partner, as they enter the home stretch of this match. Buzzing and chittering, the electric ghost then zips around the wrestler, having seemingly lost his ability to communicate verbally. But all the same, the royal gets the message, promising that they'll make this a quick fight so it can return to the lab soon. As Burnett calls for the match to resume, it is clear that Rotom boasts a speed which eclipses anything Primarina can comprehend, let alone counter. And with 2 tiring fights under her belt, it is no surprise that a single shockingly fast electric move from the Cyber Ghost downs her, tying the match back up with 1 Pokemon apiece. Returning Marowak to the field, Ash reasons that all this speed has to come at the cost of at least some defense, meaning if they can just get a good hit in, they might be able to put the zipping Zapper down for the count. However, despite their best efforts, the challenger and his Pokemon are simply unable to take advantage of this presumed weakness with how evasive Rotom is. And as they soon learn, it punishes each attempt at attacking it by circling around Marowak and blasting with incredibly fast Electro Balls or super effective Shadow Balls, which quickly take their toll on Marowak, forcing him to brace himself with his bone. This gives Ash an idea, and as Rotom fires another Shadow Ball to finish off the Bone Keeper Pokemon, Ash tells him to ready his club, and bat it right back. This causes matching expressions of shock to cross both Rotom and the royal's face, as Marowak stands up straight and adopts a baseballer's stance. A moment later, the Shadow Ball is upon him, but channeling all his strength into his Shadow Bone, Marowak swings, catching the Umbral Orb and sending it spiraling directly into Rotom with an earth-shaking boom, as Ash cheers it looks like they just hit a home run. Unfortunately, looks can be deceiving, As when the smoke clears, Rotom is smirking, a faint shimmering bubble fading away to reveal that he was protected the last second. A little shaken, Ash tells Marowak they'll just have to try again, but it is clear their opponents aren't going to give them a second chance at such a devastating strategy. As a moment later, Rotom zips to float inches from Marowak's face, and before he can strike with his bone, unloads a point-blank Shadow Ball directly into the Fire Spirit's skull, which sends him flying into the air. When he lands, it is with a hard thump, and after taking a moment to inspect Marowak's condition, Burnett declares him unable to battle, meaning Ash has lost.
From the sidelines, Lily and Kiawe look on, incredibly proud of Ash's performance, but at the same time worried for what another loss could mean. However, this fear is promptly allayed when Ash and the Master Royal run to meet in the middle of the battlefield and excitedly discuss their amazing clash, showing how much Ash has matured since his defeat at the hands of Olivia. Sadly, this discussion is cut short when Burnett approaches, gushing over the battle and all of the Master Royal's Pokemon. When she finally reaches the wrestler's side, she gives him a big hug and thanks him for making her birthday so special, to which he adopts a macho voice and grins that it was nothing, and that he's glad to have met such a devoted fan. But his grin turns to a grimace when Burnett gives a little sniff, and in a tone of curiosity, comments how he wears the same cologne as Kukui. At once, sweat begins pouring off the hero of Alola, as he promptly detaches himself from Burnett's grip, saying that he has to go. Desperately, the professor calls after her crush, pleading with him to stay just a little longer, but it seems whatever other engagement the Master Royal has is so pressing that he doesn't even have time to say what it is, as he runs up the beach and out of view.
Moments after the Master Royale's strange departure, Professor Kukui comes strolling back onto the beach, looking pleased with himself, but adopts a disappointed expression when his wife says that he just missed the Master Royal. However, when asked if she enjoyed the battle, Burnett confirms that she did, and that alone makes Kukui happy. He then says that there's only one thing left to do, and that's to enjoy some delicious ice cream cake, a notion everyone agrees with, and so they all head inside. When Kukui gets fetched the cake and Burnett has a knife in her hand, Kiawe offers to take a family photo, which Burnett thanks him for, before telling Lily to get in there for the photo. This stunts the girl, who blushes bright and mutters that she doesn't deserve to be in the photo since she's not a real member of their family. However, this makes Ash laugh in a strange mix of amusement and sternness as he tells her not to be ridiculous. Kukui and Burnett clearly love Lily, and she loves them, so that makes them family. He then teasingly adds, does this mean that she doesn't consider him and Cynthia a real family, just because he's adopted? The nonchalant delivery of this bombshell is such a Cynthia move that for a moment, the assembled group almost don't believe him. But then, Lily curiously asks if he's being serious, to which Ash nods, stating that this is why he dyes his hair, since he's always wished he could look more like his mom. He then laughs a little self-consciously, admitting that the first time he did it himself, he was 6, and he didn't fully understand the instructions, so his hair turned out as orange as a Charizard. This makes everyone laugh, and when Kukui says he's right and beckons Lily once more, she happily accepts, though not before urging Ash to join them, since by his logic, he's a part of their family as well. Laughing harder, Ash admits that his friend is right, and so it is that when Kiawe takes the photo, it is of a family of 4, their arms around one another, and their love for each other plain to see.
And that's where we'll leave things. What lesson will Ash take from his defeat at the hands of the Master Royal?
How will it affect his upcoming grand trial battle with Kahuna Nanu?
And have we truly seen the last of Team Skull? Find out
as the journey continues.